They're not. They are. They're not. They are. What are you two talking about? Said Edward. Oliver thinks that there is a trade that ghosts exist. Well, Gordon, it's true. Don't be silly, Edward. There aren't. Oh yes, they are real. Let me tell you a story about one. And it's called, this ghost is called the Ghost Express. The Ghost what? Said Gordon. The Ghost Express. Let me start. It was during the time after the Second World War, where there was a yard where they stored engines that had been bombed. One of them was a big engine which was used to carry goods. However, its tender was destroyed and its cab was being ripped off. Another was used, and there was a tender which was used for a little medium-sized engine, but that one sadly got caught when it was whistling through, and a German bomb heard it. So both they decided to join the engine together, and then they decided to run an express service. It worked well, but then the engine didn't work well. It leaked steam everywhere. Men were not sure about what was going to happen, so they decided to leave it into the siding where the other engines were. Then one night, one of the men was on control when they saw the engine moved. Just then, he rubbed his eyes, then it was gone. The next time, he told his men what was happened. They were going to a meeting about all the engines who were blown up. Then they heard an engine coming. Then they were all surprised when it turns out to be the ghostly. It was the engine rushed through. The men thought this must be a ghost, and they decided that it must call. They thought they should call it the Ghost Express. The Ghost Express haunts the main line for all time, and that's all about the Ghost Express, said Edward. Pah! Said Gordon. What a load of nonsense. Later, Gordon was helping with the homeward rush. He was helping with a slow passenger train. The reason why is the back controller wanted him to be helping out since he was very strong at pulling coaches. He was waiting at the signal when he heard an engine coming. Then he was surprised who was coming along. It was the Ghost Express. Gordon just closed his eyes. Then he opened it again, and it was gone. Gordon thought he was so spooked. Gordon was spooked to his will to his axles. When Gordon came back home, Edward looked at him. He was shivering in all directions, looking left to right as well, up and down. Edward smiled. Spook, are you? Gordon? Gordon looked at Edward. No, I'm going to sleep, he mumbled, but he suddenly knew that he was spooked. So Edward's story was true about the Ghost Express. And as for the Ghost Express, he still haunts the main line. After the situation with the Ghost Express, Gordon had been silent since then. Spencer put a very dislike to it. I don't understand why you're just so freaked out by it, said Spencer. You like you've been freaked out for it. Oh, look out, look out, look out, I am the Ghost Express. Leave Gordon alone, said Edward. You're just being a very horrible engine. am nuts, he mumbled. Well, you may be freaked out by that, wouldn't you, Spencer? No, I wouldn't, said Spencer. Not one bit. Oh, really, said Edward. How about this story will make you quiver? Go ahead, said Spencer. Try and scare me if you like. So, Edward started his story. A long time ago, before Gordon and Henry came to the railway, I was the only engine running on the line. I worked well, but the work was just too much. The railway, at the time, the fat controller bought an engine to help me. The engine arrived. He didn't have a name, just a number, 51, and he worked in the yards. He liked to shunt the trucks in his own way. I told him to shunt him in the right place. Listen, he said, it's I do what I do, so keep out of the way. And that was all he said. One night there was a load of vans that needed to be shunted into place. They were full with explosives that needed to go. The next morning they needed to go to a place. It was during the time of the Second World War, or the First World War. I warned him to be careful, but he just took no notice. Soon, meanwhile, he was shunting the trucks in the siding. He was rough with the trucks. He bumped them, banged them. Then, there was a massive explosion. Then, bang, bang, bang. All went up in smokes. I heard the news followed, and I went to come and get the rescue. When I got there, I was shocked to surprise. The explosives were destroyed, and there was only a bit of left of 51. I warned him, said Edward crossly, but he didn't take no notice. But on every night in this yard, legend has it that there's always trucks moving on their own or by themselves, and people say they must have seen the ghost of 51. Legend has it that he haunts this yard, but the way you can tell where he is, you will see trucks moved on their own, and then followed by you'll see the engine coming towards you, and then when it disappears there's a following bang. Puh! Says Spencer, that's a load of nonsense. I do not care. One night Edward and Gordon were doing night shifts, so they were away. Spencer was in the yard alone. He thought this was just silly. Where are you, 51? You can't hide from me, joked Spencer. Then it all happened at once. Suddenly some trucks moved on their own. Spencer was curious. Who's there? No one replied. The trucks were shunted into another siding. Spencer was confused. Then a ghostly figure of 51 came towards him. Spencer freaked out. Then it disappeared, followed by a shrieking bang. Spencer was freaked out. He shut his eyes and waited until morning arrived. The next morning he woke up shivering like mad. Edward spotted. Spook, are you, Spencer? He joked. No, I am not spooked, he said. Then he sobbed. Yes, I am spooked. This is true. It is true, said Edward. That story is real true. You know, legend has it. So, are you still scared? Yes, and I promise I will never, ever joke about being good and get any people who are getting scared by ghosts. They are real after all. And after that, Spencer always keeps a lookout, and he never wanted to be alone in the yard ever again. "Hello, I am a ghost," said Diesel in an oily voice. "Stop it, Diesel," said Edward. "You're just being silly." He mumbled. Leave Gordon and Henry, leave Gordon and Spencer alone. You would be frightened if you see a ghost." "A ghost? Things that go bump in the night? Nah, I wouldn't." "Oh, really?" said Edward. "Well, I'll tell you a story that will make you a full quiver." "Well, outside Henry's tunnel, there is a level crossing, right?" "Yes." "Well, there's a signal box not far, right?" "Yes." "Well, long time ago, before you came, Diesel, the level crossing was used to the signalman used to use the level crossing used to operate the level crossing. He often closes it when he hears the bell, and he closed it. It was a very dark night. He was just closing the gate. He couldn't see. Then, burst out from the tunnel was a fast express train from the other railway, and it rushed through. It murdered the signalman. But every night, if you're ever near there, you can always hear the sense of a bell ringing from the old signal box, and you can always see the gates mysteriously closing by themselves." "Pah," said Diesel. "What a load of nonsense." And Diesel just drove and oiled away. Later, Diesel was just in the yard. Diesel was at the farm. He was dropping some packages off, and then he was ready to go home. Suddenly, he heard a bell it sounded like a loud bell. "Odd," he mumbled. "That signal box cannot move." Then it happened. The gates mysteriously closed by themselves, and suddenly there was a shrill whistle from an engine coming towards them. "It's the ghost," said Diesel. "Please, driver, take me back." I can't," he said. He mumbled. His driver hadn't heard what he had heard. Diesel wanted to go back, but he couldn't. Soon it got darker and darker, and then the bell went off again, and then the gates mysteriously opened. Then suddenly there was another bell, and the gates mysteriously closed again. Diesel was freaked out more. Then there was another bell, which was signified as all clear, and the gate opened again. Diesel was freaked out, and then his driver came. "All right, boy, we can go now." "Look, driver, look!" His driver looked. He was horrified too. The gates were opening and closing by themselves. "All right, boy, I think you've seen enough. Let's go." And they did. When Diesel got home, he closed his eyes. He didn't, and after that, he didn't talk about the subject of ghosts. After the situation what Diesel had on the level crossing, James had a great joke about it. "I don't know why you're oh dear," he said. "I don't believe it. Two high-speed trains, which is Gordon and Spencer, got scared. Now Diesel got scared. How could this ever got worse?" "You could be scared," said Edward. "Me?" said James. "Nah, I wouldn't be scared. Ghosts, they're just stuff and nonsense." "Oh, let me tell you a story," he mumbled. And then, "Go ahead," said James. Edward began his story. "Once upon a time," he said, there was a branch line that used to run up to the railway where Duke used to work. Do you remember Duke, our hero? Remember the time when Thomas told the story about him?" "Well, yes," said James. "Well, there was a railway line that used to run up there, and so a little engine travelled with his passenger coach along the line. The coach was an old Victorian, old suburban coach. She didn't have a name, but the engine liked her, and she was always wondering if she wanted to do any work. The engine, however, was small. He was small, and he worked hard on the line. He often meets Duke along the line, and he often gives his goods to there. Duke was much younger at the time, and he ran lots of times. But sadly, there was bad news along the way. Because the railway had to pay tax. Since it was just too much money, they decided to close the line. The poor coach was sadly moved to a scrapyard. Children came and said and called her an old slow coach, and that's how her name became as old slow coach. That's why only the mice ride in her now. And that's how and as you know, you probably heard the story about when Thomas and Percy rescued her from the scrapyard. Yes, I have heard about that story, said James. That's what happened to the engine, he said. The engine, he was going to be sent for scrap. He was cross. He had plenty of experience left. But people often see the engine at the station picking up its passengers, and sometimes they can see trucks moving on the road. Seemed like he was shunting the wagons away. "Pah!" said James. "That is just so silly, Edward. I'm not scared." James bustled away. Later that night, James was doing a job. Knapford Station was upgrading its stations, and so James was being demonstrated to check with the coaches. Because they chose him, he was a mixed traffic engine, so he would do the truck and the coaches very well. As he was just dawdling, he heard an engine's whistle. "That's odd," he mumbled. He didn't know who it was. It was not a whistle he heard before. Then he heard doors opening by themselves. Then a ghostly figure of the engine was there. Then he disappeared. James was confused. Where did he go? He mumbled. Then he saw trucks moving on their own, feeling like they'd been shunted. Then he reappeared again. James was confused. Then he disappeared, followed another whistle. James was getting creeped out by this. "Driver," he mumbled. But then it was beside him. It gave the whistle and it disappeared. James had enough. "Driver, please, take me away, please," he said. "All right, boy, you've seen enough," he said. And so James and his driver decided to call it a day and went. The next morning, James was shivering to his axles to his wheels. Edward looked over. He didn't say anything, but he smiled. But he said, "Now you know," he said, "how Gordon, Spencer and Dieselfeld all James had to agree